This is my first visit to the Grand Chancellor since I stayed here in December 2018, when I flew over from Melbourne for my father's funeral, just after his 98th birthday. Charles Chung was born in 1920 in China, the youngest son of a 50-year-old, well-established Hobart businessman. Charles arrived at the age of 12, went for some time to St. Virgil's College, and very soon was cooking meals for the staff of R. Ham & Co. Later, with my mother Dorothy, he would open W. Chung Sing & Co., then launch Hobart's first Chinese restaurant, the Golden Dragon, run 4 Charles fruit stores, and end his days as an artist in retirement. I partly owe my presence here today to the death of my mother in lockdown COVID Melbourne, because when I then flew over here again to organise my mother's funeral, I saw a house and decided, as a COVID refugee, to buy it and enjoy Hobart's clear, blue, unpolluted skies. Although Dorothy was born in Hobart, her parents come from the Four Counties district of China in Guangdong province, the same part of China where my father's family originated from. Her father, my maternal grandfather, followed in his father's footsteps to the tin mining village of Welborough. He ventured south, opened a number of businesses, changed his name from Jin to Henry, and at the time of his death in 1941, Henry & Co. supplied Government House and the Archbishop's Palace. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank both my parents, my mother Dorothy and my father Charles, not for my birth, but for their divorce, which catapulted me at the age of 16 months into the challenging childhood that made me what I am. The first Chinese divorce splashed across the Tasmanian truth. Women whispered as Dorothy approached. Even those she thought of as friends disappeared into shops or scurried across the street, bringing hillmen screeching to a halt. This was Hobart, not Hollywood. The question I've been asked most often is, where do you come from? Well, I grew up over the fruit shop Henry & Co. at 139 Liverpool Street. In my green school uniform, brown shoes and kid gloves, I trudged up Harrington Street to St. Mary's College. And there our history began with William the Conqueror and the Battle of Hastings in 1066. We saw Tasmania as a little part of England, salted with white skins, lightly peppered with new Australians. The Tasmanian Aborigines had been exterminated, we were taught, and at every event and every film we all rose from our seats, God save the Queen. If my mother broke into Chinese in front of my friends, I died with embarrassment. I wanted to disappear. Anyone heard speaking a language other than English aroused suspicion. People gaped, as though watching freaks perform under the circus tent. By the time I left school, things had changed. And a family friend suggested to me, "You're Chinese. You should speak Chinese. You could go to Canberra, learn Cantonese, and maybe join Foreign Affairs or the Chinese service of Radio Australia. I was horrified. I couldn't help my Chinese face, but everyone still asked, "Where do you come from?" At least I could forestall the slowly enunciated, "And do you speak English?" by opening my mouth. I had to assimilate. Being Chinese was bad enough. Why learn to speak Chinese? That's crazy, I said. Learning Chinese is the last thing I want to do. So today, when the world is transformed from that of my childhood, here in multicultural Australia, there are 1.4 million Chinese Australians. Mandarin is the most spoken language after English, and Cantonese the fourth most spoken. And all I can say is, 我不会说中国话. I can't speak Chinese. My mother's occupation also put me outside the norm. The nuns knew she went to Hobart Technical College because one day when I was 9, Sister Lawrence pointed her chalk at me. "Your mother's at Tech, so she can paint the nativity scene." A roll of heat swept down from under my black fringe. I felt 50 pairs of eyes from row upon row of girls staring at me. I looked back up at the blackboard. Sister Lawrence had added to the words, which now read, "Cards, carols, crib, enactment, nativity painting." Now, my mother was at Tech. She went there weekly, but she couldn't draw. A picture of the Virgin Mary in her long, flowing blue veil, Joseph in his brownish tones, with the infant Jesus being born in a stable at Bethlehem. She couldn't paint that. She couldn't draw. She was drawn. She was an artist's model. That's what she was at Tech. Full figure it was called, without any clothes. She modelled nude. As if it wasn't enough for my sister Lahine and me to be the only Chinese, the only two with divorced parents, our mother had to be a nude model. What's more, she insisted on calling herself Miss Henry, at a time when the only others called Miss were either young, unmarried ladies or spinsters. And I knew from my Enid Blyton books that spinsters were withered old women who lived with cats. They wore bonnets, they carried baskets, and they acted queer. Miss Henry carried no basket. At a time when few women drove, Miss Henry delivered our lunch from behind the wheel of an open-top sports car, a red MG which he drove right up into the school grounds. Not until 1993, at the 125th anniversary dinner of St. Mary's College at West Point, did I dare speak publicly about my idiosyncratic childhood. And even then, my sister, nearing 50, who flew out from London, relived the pangs of the past. When I stepped down from the podium, she accused, "Did you have to mention the artist, the model, and the red MG?" My sister never overcame the embarrassment of childhood. Even in the bitter sweet winter of snow-clad London, New Year's Day, 2001, only hours before Leihin died, she surprised me. Sitting up in bed, she reflected, Miss Henry, Miss Henry, with a gentle, mocking smile. Miss Henry. When I think about that now, I realize the other girls must have thought we were illegitimate. Now, illegitimacy, ching-chong Chinaman are not expressions heard today, which is a sign of how society has changed in sex, race, religion, gender. One of my life stories is the white plan to banish me. When in 1974 the ABC appointed me as a reporter on the nightly show This Day Tonight, the ABC was acting ahead of the times. Years before SBS, I became the first non-white reporter on the Australian box. I understand the ABC received a handful of racist mail, but I saw none of it. However, top brass was very slow to protect me from internal attack. In 1978, when I was based in Melbourne, the ABC Current Affairs underwent one of its periodic program changes, format changes. And this was under a new boss called Derek White. He flew down from Sydney to Melbourne, and I went into my producer's office for a meeting with the two men. I went in curious. What would my role be in the new program nationwide? I came out stunned. So humiliated was I by what I just heard, I spoke to no one. Only when I got home that evening did I unburden myself to my partner, John Martin. That's outrageous, he said. You've got to tell the union. Other than that, I spoke to no one. 1 week later, I slipped down from our unit on the 3rd floor of a block of flats on Queen's Road to the milk bar for the milk and morning papers. Imagine my horror when I saw, staring up at me, a picture of my own face on the front page of Truth. Girl reporter complains, race row at ABC. A reporter on the ABC's This Day Tonight show claims an ABC official has told her she has no future in television because of her Asian appearance. Helene Chung, 33, also claims that a high-ranking official told her to stop wearing makeup because it accentuates her narrow eyes, and so on. It took the ABC 6 months before the white plan to banish me disappeared. Meanwhile, I stayed reporting on Nationwide for the next 5 years until I applied for the position of ABC Tokyo correspondent, only to be shot by bullet train to Beijing. So I arrived in China as the first female the ABC had ever posted overseas. I landed not feeling at all Chinese, but conscious of my heritage. However, my experience of living in China as a correspondent so changed my attitude that it obliterated almost any affiliation I may have felt with the motherland of my ancestors. I was housed behind the walls of a foreign diplomatic compound. I was kept away from ordinary Chinese. I was charged top foreigner prices. Now, of course, back then, China and the Chinese looked nothing like they do today. Sleek, modern, cosmopolitan cities with fashion-conscious women decked out in designer clothes. No. When I lived there, most Chinese wore what were called mouse suits, baggy blue outfits. High heels were unheard of, cosmetics reserved for the stage. So I looked nothing like an ordinary Chinese. Now, John Martin was obviously a foreigner. But what was I? People stared. What is she? A rich, overseas Chinese? An actress? A film star? Oh, maybe she's the mistress of a high official. Today I'm lost in the crowd. But when I lived in China, just as I was out of it, not part of the Hobart in which I was raised. When I lived in China, I was an alien in the motherland. I never felt less Chinese and more Australian. And as for Australia-China relations, they're in the best shape today than ever since the pandemic. Prime Minister Albanese, Foreign Minister Wong have proven themselves skilled diplomats, cooperate where we can, disagree where we must, engage in the national interest. This has led to the release from prison of Cheng Lei, though Hung Yun-jun still remains behind bars, and the lifting of tariffs on barley, coal, maybe wine, and possibly lobsters, which will mean they'll be more expensive for us. And on Saturday, Albanese and Wong fly to China, to Shanghai and Beijing. That said, I, as an Australian Chinese, who in the lead up to COVID was flying to China every year, at least once, if not twice a year, I would be most wary to travel, if ever again, in particular in the era of Xi Jinping, because of the opaque nature of the surveillance rules and the fact that China continues to be governed by the law of rule.